You are listening to the HP Outdoors Waterfowl Podcast, Episode 6. In this episode of the HP Outdoors Waterfowl Podcast, we are talking waterfowl hunting basics. Everything you need to know to get started waterfowl and waterfowl hunting. And we share some of our stories from how we got started. So we got a good show for you. We think you're going to like it. All right. Welcome to the show. This is episode 6 of the HP Outdoors Waterfowl Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Palm, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Dan Harushka. Dan, how are you?
I'm doing well. The temperature's starting to cool down a little bit, and it's feeling like goose and duck season should. So I'm excited.
Yeah, it definitely feels like it's the time of year we all wait for, and looking forward to seeing some birds pushing down south. And here in Virginia, we've got our 4-day early duck season starting up. Next Friday. So 4 days of getting after them. And then we got to wait again until mid-November. But looking forward to getting going here next weekend.
Yep, we start Saturday as duck and goose comes back in for us. So, yep, it's time to clean the gun from the early season and get out and about.
Yeah, I'm actually, normally this time of year in between splits and stuff like that, I'm getting the bow out and doing a little archery hunting. But it's usually still pretty warm down here this time of the year. So hopefully this front that we had come through this weekend sticks around and I can bear a little time in the deer stand before it's time to get back on the ducks real hard. So far so good. I like the cool weather. It makes football season a little better. All that good stuff. So really excited about what we're feeling with the weather. But Dan, we've been getting a lot of feedback from everybody listening to the show, and to everyone that's reached out to us, asked us a question, or given us some feedback. We really appreciate it, and we absolutely encourage you to keep it coming. And obviously we've introduced a couple new things to the show as far as, how frequent we're coming out with the show and how you can reach us. And recently we've got inundated with calls and emails and things like that. But we received a call on the HP Outdoors hotline from Steven in Wisconsin and I just thought it was a really great question that, after he asked the question and I listened back to the episode that he was referring to, I thought it really made a lot of sense. And I wanted to go ahead and address that before we get started on this show. And Stephen was asking, basically referring to our hunting public land episode, what is it that you can ask, your state's DNR or your state's biologist or whoever it is that you can find at the state about, how good of a resource can they be and what's off limits and what kind of stuff can you ask them? So I thought that was a really great question, Dan. And I've actually done this exact thing when I moved to Virginia. I reached out to them and asked them a couple questions. So I'm going to share some of that as far as what I did. But I don't know, have you ever had an opportunity or a necessity to reach out to your state DNR and ask any kind of questions like that, Dan?
Yeah, well, like we talked before, I'm a stickler on my license. So even, when we go on our yearly trip to Maryland, I'm always calling if I have any questions just to make sure my dates are right. And, I would say that there's no question that's really off limits. Like as far as, they're out and about. So if you have questions about birds, if you have questions about your license, if you have questions just about anything, like throw it out there and ask them, and a personal experience, even going out to Colorado elk hunting. Like we went in and we talked to those guys, the BLM out there all the time. Like we'd stop in and they'd give us some tips on, where to try and, how to talk to the landowners if something was landlocked. And I mean, they're just a wealth of knowledge. So I think there's no question that you can't ask.
Yeah. That's another thing, they're not, they're employed by the state, they're paid by, state generated funds, whether it be license sales or what have you. So they're there really to field questions and to be helpful to hunters and to the public at large. So I would agree with you. I don't think there's anything particularly off limits for your DNR, your conservation officers. For me, I've mentioned it several times on the show, but the blind laws in Virginia can be very, very confusing. So, that was something that I had questions about, and I asked them specifically about that. But also, this year in the summer, they passed Sunday hunting in Virginia. So now we can legally hunt, private ground and public waterways and things like that on Sundays. So obviously there was a learning curve there, and some clarification was needed on some of the particular regulations and stuff like that. So that's some of the stuff that I hit them up for. Another thing that I did recently with them was there's a creek that runs relatively close to my house, and I just emailed them specifically about this creek, asking for put in take out spots. Is it is there any specific regulations to that creek as far as float hunting it from a canoe, maybe jump shooting some wood ducks or something like that? And it actually turns out that part of the creek becomes a county owned reservoir past a certain bridge. So that past that bridge is off limits to hunting, but up into that bridge is open for hunting, and you can legally hunt through there. So that was something that I obviously wouldn't have known had I not reached out to them and asked, and I could have been ended up in a bad spot had I been up there hunting and the conservation officers came and somebody reported me or what have you. So that was another good thing. But also I just asked them how heavily does the creek get hunted? Have they been called in there a bunch for landowner complaints, that sort of thing? And I also just sort of asked in general any other recommendations that they might have. They have all of the resources as far as the knowledge of where you can hunt, the open places that are available to you, hunting pressure, that kind of thing. I ask them if they have any landowners that call in and say that they're having problems with birds or deer or what have you, that might be interested in having someone come out there and help them with that. So those are all questions that I asked specifically in my situation here. But like you said, I don't think that there's really anything off base, off limits when you're talking with them. And quite honestly, most of them have been incredibly helpful in, helping me get started. But keep in mind, it's unlikely that you're going to find a sweet little honey hole from them, because, anybody can call them and ask them the same exact questions and they're going to get the same exact answers most likely. So keep that all in mind when you're having conversations with them. But definitely great resources, and one that I think, some people probably overlook. And then others, once you have a good positive experience with them, realize how valuable they can be and tend to use them quite a bit. So definitely a good resource to use there. And, I know, Dan, up in your neck of the woods with Pymatuming, management area, there's a lot of, conservation officers and biologists up there and stuff. So being a hotbed for waterfowl hunting right there locally, I'm sure those guys field questions all the time in this fashion.
Yeah, and they're always out and about. So, I feel like they get a bad rap most of the time, but that's usually from guys that are always getting checked because they're doing something wrong, or they're too close to houses. And you sit and talk to them, they'll come out and check your license and do your ammo check, making sure you're not using the lead. And they're good guys and they're out doing the job. So just sit there and talk to them, and their wealth of knowledge, like you said, being legal, going to that reservoir or whatnot, but they'll give you tips on landowners, like, this landowner, he's going to call us every time you hunt next to his property, if you're legal or not. So, just be aware that, if you go out and set up in the morning, he's going to be there at sunup and, come out and talk to you or yell at you or whatnot. But, they'll give you some good tips for sure.
Yeah. So hopefully, that answers the question. And, if you find yourself listening to this show and have, a question like Steven did, feel free to reach out to us. You can shoot us an email at info@hpoutdoors.com. We've got a contact form on our website that you can fill out and ask your questions through there. Or if you like, you can call us on our hotline, 724-609-FOWL, 724-609-3695. And, you can leave us a message on there. Some of the messages that we'll be using on the air, so everyone will hear the same question that you're asking. But lots of ways to reach us, and we certainly enjoy interacting with everybody. Obviously, we get a ton of messages, which we are very grateful and very appreciative for. But obviously, we can't get back to every single person. We do our best, and we like to try to address stuff on the show so that everybody can kind of share in the discussion. So keep that stuff in mind as you go through and listen to the show.
I was just going to throw out another point there. a lot of biologists and whatnot, when they're banding, like they're looking for volunteers. So if you can go spend a couple hours doing that, just talking to them about where the birds are coming from and, where they roost at, like these guys know where the birds are at. So if that's your ultimate goal, get out, spend some time and talk to them, and you're going to have more knowledge than when you started.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really, really good point. Most states that I know of that do banding are always looking for volunteers, and it's a great way. And I know you recently sent me an email, Dan, about some banding data that they had been doing in your area. So it gives you an idea of the age structure and just how many birds they're banding and all that kind of stuff. So just a little confidence boost to know that there's that many birds and that many banded birds in your area, which is kind of neat. So definitely a cool experience. If you haven't had a chance to do that, do some, banding. It's a really cool, really fun experience. So I would encourage everybody to definitely go out there and try that. So Dan, this episode is a topic that we get questions on almost daily. And it's, a question from someone who's getting started waterfowl hunting and just is looking for, an answer to a question that to a seasoned waterfowler may be, something basic and may not be something that you would think about addressing that often. But we wanted to take a step back just based on the feedback and the questions that we receive to sort of do a whole scale, soup to nuts, review and overview of getting started waterfowl hunting. So what we mean is if you've never stepped foot in a waterfowl blind or hunted ducks and geese, this is the episode for you. We're going to we'll do our best to cover everything that you need to know to help get you started and being successful for hunting waterfowl. So, Dan, you ready to get into this?
Yeah, we were talking about this before, but we kind of started hot and heavy. You come out of the gate with Mark and then Kelly Powers, and we really didn't know what our listeners would be like, or how seasoned they were. So we kind of skipped right over the whole foundation of getting started. So I think this is a great time to get into it. And like you said, we're just getting a ton of questions about it. So, it makes me feel good that we can help someone out to get out and enjoy what we do on a yearly basis.
Yeah. And I mean, this episode is a direct result of feedback from the listeners. And, we all started somewhere. So this is actually something that I really enjoyed talking about because, I did a lot of this on my own as far as getting started. So I have a lot of growing pains that I can share with people. So let's go ahead and get into it. We're going to talk about all of the basics that you need to know to get started in waterfowl hunting. All right, Dan, let me ask you a question here. If you had one piece of advice, just one thing that you were going to tell a guy that was getting ready to get into waterfowl hunting for the first time and wants to get started, what's one piece of advice that you'd give them?
Oh man, I don't, some people have a lot of friends and some don't. So my first piece of advice is to get online and do some research. There's, Delta Waterfowl, Ducks Unlimited. There's tons and tons of just unlimited articles on how to hunt and what you need. And I think just online research is just invaluable. There's so much out there from old timers to newbies to things that some people, tips that work for them and some things that don't. And it's nonstop. You can get online and read all day long. So I think, online research is just invaluable.
Yeah. That's one of my, bullets that I'm going to hit on. But if you were to ask me that question and I had to give somebody one piece of advice, I would say, a little bit tongue in cheek, but I would say, be careful what you wish for, because unlike anything that I've ever been involved with regarding the outdoors, waterfowl hunting has taken a hold of me stronger than anything I could have possibly imagined. And what I mean by that is, like we've talked about on the show, I grew up a diehard deer and turkey hunter. Archery season, rifle season, late muzzleloader season. It was all there. I spent a ton of time chasing whitetails. It took one waterfowl hunt for that all to change. I duck hunted one time up on the Maryland Eastern Shore, and I knew from that first morning that it was over. That's what I wanted to do. And with that comes the massive learning curve, the money, the financial resources you got to put in to be successful in this sport. But it's all worth it to me, and I think a lot of people would agree with that. But so I would say, tongue in cheek, before you get started, be careful what you wish for, because it's just a sport unlike any other, at least to me. So let's talk about some of the general stuff as far as just general guidelines, when you're looking to get into it. And I'm going to start by piggybacking off of what you just said. I would recommend finding a mentor. And what I mean by that is someone that's been doing it a little bit, that can help you out and at least get you started. Local DU chapters, Delta Waterfowl chapters, things like that are great spots to go and meet people in your area that are waterfowl hunting. That doesn't mean that the first time you meet them, they're going to take you out to their best blind and put you on birds, but it's someone to talk to, someone to seek guidance with, and sort of help you get started. If you don't have access to that stuff, you can definitely meet people online and just ask questions in these forums. There's a lot of people out there that are really willing to help and ask, answer a lot of questions, but sometimes it's just easier to be able to have that one-on-one time or that in-person interaction with somebody. So, I definitely recommend trying to find a mentor if at all possible.
Yeah, you can't beat someone that's been there and done that. They have the experience and they know usually what it takes to get it done. So I'll just keep going on that and, piggyback off what you said, go on a guided hunt. And you have to realize that, all of the work has been done for you. And, most of the time, you have a caller and a blind with you, you have a guide, and they know where the birds are at. They watch them. I mean, that is their job. So when you go there, sometimes you have to help set up decoys. Sometimes you don't. So, I mean, a lot of the work's taken for granted when you go on a guided hunt, but that's what you pay for. But when you go in there and you just have nonstop bird action, like I'm sure you did on the Eastern Shore your first time, like you said, be careful what you wish for, because that guided hunt, one, you're going to learn a ton, and two, you're going to have more fun than you ever have if you've never been on one before, because usually it's nonstop and it's tough to beat.
I would recommend to anybody going on a guided hunt, before you even think about buying waterfowl specific decoys, guns, that sort of stuff, go on a guided hunt. I mean, in our area, I don't know, I can't speak to everywhere, but in our area, you can go on a day hunt for between $150 and $175 a day. And you can go with a guide who's going to set you up, just like you said, on the birds with decoys and give you, an experience that should be a good one. But, $150 will get you maybe 6 full body honker decoys, when you're talking adding to your spread and that kind of thing. So it's a good investment to give you a taste of, am I going to enjoy waterfowl hunting, and am I going to like what this is all about? Like I said before, I think, most people find that they do and really have a great experience, but maybe it's not for you. And that money that you spend up front on that experience would save you a lot than just going out and buying a bunch of decoys and getting a lot of waterfowl specific stuff, and then you never end up using it. So going on a guided hunt, in my opinion, is money really well spent when you're getting started, just trying to figure out, is this something that I really want to get into? So definitely encourage that. That's how I got my start, and it worked out perfectly. But another thing that goes along with the guided hunt, Dan mentioned you're going to learn a ton. You can sit there and just pick their brain throughout the hunt, asking questions. Why do you do this? Why do you set this way? The things that, are going to be completely foreign to you that they do on a daily basis, is just a wealth of knowledge that you can pick through. Also, these guys are going to be familiar with the waterfowl hunting regulations, bag limits, and they can help you talk about that kind of and learn that stuff, because it can be overwhelming at times. I mean, if you've been a deer hunter your entire life, now that you're hunting a completely different game, you have to relearn all of that stuff. So bag limits, and the ducks identification, all that kind of stuff, all that guesswork is really taken out of it when you're hunting with a guide, because they kind of control all that for you and help you navigate all that. So in addition to learning the regs on your own, when you're hunting on your own, you get a nice sort of training wheels, for lack of a better term, when you're going with a guide to help you get started in a lot of that stuff.
And that being said, I'll go back to it again. The proper tags and licenses, when you go to buy stuff, if you go to your Walmart or wherever you buy it, make sure you know what you need, because there's so many, the cashier at Walmart, half the time they don't know what a duck stamp is, or they definitely don't know everything that you need to be legal in the field. So make sure you do your homework with that. And like I said, put it on yourself. Don't put it in anyone else's hands to make sure you're legal going out and hunting.
And I don't want to speak for every state, but where we hunt, typically to be legal to hunt, you're required to buy a $15 federal migratory bird stamp. Buy at your post office. You can buy it online. You buy the state stamp. So each state has its own stamp in addition to the federal stamp. And then you're required to get your HIP number, which is in Pennsylvania where you're at. They do it for you as you're buying your license. In Virginia, you have to call the separate number, log in, and enter your license number, and they give you a HIP number. And basically, this number just helps them track harvest data, and you answer questions on how many doves and ducks and geese you killed the year before, and it's a mechanism for them to help quantify harvest data and that kind of stuff. So that doesn't mean that everywhere you hunt in the country is going to be the same way. So again, it's on you to know what those licenses are and what's required. But again, these are, the typical stuff. And again, this is another great question for your local DNR, your conservation officer. Give them a call. They will make sure that you are squared away and have the licenses that you need. So definitely a good thing there. What do you think, Dan? Anything else as far as just a general kind of consensus, need to know before you kind of get into it?
I think going on a guided hunt, just make sure that your expectations are realistic afterwards. But I can guarantee you, when you have a hunt that is better, that you set up, you put the decoys out, you called, when your hunt is better than a guided hunt, there's no feeling like it. The sense of accomplishment and, just pride that you have is totally worth it. So, the expectations are going to be really high if you go in and, a 2-day hunt or a 3-day hunt, and you just, limit out in the first hour or so. Make sure that, you want that feeling again for sure, but just make sure that you realize that it might not happen every time. And most of the time it's not going to happen every time. So just realistic expectations after something like a guided hunt.
And another thing too that you want to keep in mind is when you're saying limiting out, you might be hunting a place where your expectation is you're probably going to only see wood ducks because it's a swampy area or something like that. Pennsylvania is common like this. So if you go out there in the morning and shoot 3 wood ducks, that's a limit, And although you can shoot 6 ducks during the day, you can't shoot any more than 3 wood ducks. So, that's kind of where the regulations play into effect. If you start shooting mallards, you can only shoot 4 mallards out of your 6 limit, but only 2 of those mallards can be hens. You can shoot 4 drakes, but only up to 2 hens. So again, it's just important to know what you can take, have an expectation of what kind of birds you might see, and, scope your expectations accordingly so that you can, not be disappointed that, you're hunting on an open water spot where you shoot a little couple, some divers involved with that, and, you get a little bit bigger bag. So, but again, I don't think I can stress it enough. I think a guided hunt is a really good way to go when you're getting started. But let's talk a little bit, Dan, about just the guns and the ammo that you need to waterfowl hunt. The good thing about this is primarily if you've turkey hunted or something like that, you probably have a gun already that you can use, for waterfowl hunting. Typically, most guys are going to be using a 3-inch or 3.5-inch chambered shell for this. The big thing here is, and this, again, this is as basic as it gets. To hunt waterfowl, you need to use a non-toxic load, so not lead, steel, or something that some of these other manufacturers that have non-toxic materials that are legal. But don't be grabbing your turkey shells and heading to the waterfowl blind. You're going to get yourself in some trouble if you do that.
Yeah, people, they think they can get away with it until the Game Commission comes by with their magnets and, one sticks to their magnet and you're headed for a world of trouble there.
So, the good thing is though, ammo is relatively cheap. You can buy, Winchester, Federal Premium, Kent, 12 to $15 a box. But when you start looking at steel loads, just like everything else, there's a lot of option to choose from. The loads that you're going to use for hunting geese may be different than from what you're hunting ducks and all of that kind of stuff. So, Dan and I aren't the best examples of this because we both actually tend to do the same exact thing when it comes to this. We both shoot Berettas, we both shoot 3-inch chambers, and we both shoot number 2 steel for pretty much everything. Some guys will use different loads for ducks and geese, but we both use 2s for everything. And Dan, why don't you talk a little bit about why you use 2s for everything?
Well, starting out, we got into the BB and the triple B and late season, we'd even get into some tee shot. And it actually took going down to the Eastern Shore and talking to the guides on a guided hunt and, just picking their brain, like you said. And our guides all used full chokes and they all used number 2. And I was like, well, isn't that a light when it gets, heavy in the season? The birds are, a little more cushion there. And they said, well, a 2's going to do it no matter what. If you hit them, they're going to die. If you miss them, then they're going to fly away. You have less wounded birds, and I took that from them and kind of rolled with that. So that's what I use. Full choke and number 2s. So, and it has worked. So you have to be confident in your shooting, but at the same time, you don't have as many cripples. So you either drop them or you miss them, and that's I kind of like that.
Yeah, I want to come back to chokes in a minute, but I want to just elaborate a little bit more on what you were just saying. So to give some perspective, when you're talking goose loads, some guys will use, 2s and double B in the early season. And then as their feathers thicken up and it gets colder, they'll go to the triple B or the T shot, the largest shot you can get. And for ducks, guys will use a range of size between number 2s, number 3s, number 4s. Every guy's gun pattern's a little different. What they like is different. For me, that is just too much to keep track of. I told you, in a previous episode, I don't like clutter. I don't like a lot of different stuff that I don't need. For me, it just keeps it simple. I grab the 2s when I'm at the store. I grab them when I leave in the morning and I throw them in my blind bag. I don't have to worry about not having the right shells, not having this. I shoot with a full choke for the same exact reasons you were saying. It gives me, the effective range that I'm looking for, but I've got the confidence to execute shots at close range with that choke as well because I've practiced it and I know my capabilities. So for me, that works the best. But, every guy's a little bit different. You may not like that, and that's okay. It's better to shoot what works for you and what's in your gun than to do what somebody else says just because, that's what the way that they do it. When you start looking at these shells, you're going to have a lot of information to digest. Not only do you have the size of the shot, you have the weight of the shot and the speed of the shot. So it's comparable to, the archery hunters out there can relate to this when you're talking about your arrow weight. Obviously, the heavier you go, the more punch and more penetrating power you're going to have, but you're going to sacrifice some speed. It's going to be the same way when you're talking about waterfowl loads as far as the size and the weight of the load will carry a stronger punch, but it's not going to be as fast and as speed. So you're going to be leading your birds a lot more. A lot of stuff goes into that, and a lot of just trial and error and finding what works with your budget and what you're comfortable with, and sort of all of those things. But for me, I like number 2s. I shoot it out of a full choke, and the number 3s have been good for me. I don't own a 3.5 chambered gun. They're quite a bit more expensive in my opinion. I've seen them just completely beat the heck out of people's shoulders in the past. And I've, you talk about going down to the shore. We've got a good friend that expressed some serious doubts about the geese down there in the late season being able to be killed with number 2s, and we proved to him obviously that that they can't hold the 2s even in the late season. So I don't have any reservations whether it's September or January. Hunting big honkers with number 2s. It's worked great for me. And, that's just my mentality on all that.
I was just going to add into, we just got some more stores in the area that carry a lot more ammo. But previous to that, if you would try and go and get some, BB or triple B late in the season, you're going to be disappointed. So if you go in, thinking number two, like number two is always in stock. And if you're like, I need, T-shot, and you just couldn't find it sometimes. So that's another reason, just keep it simple. And number two's all the way here. And, it's been working effective. So I like it.
Well said there. So let's talk a little bit about, a pump shotgun versus a semi-auto shotgun. This is something that, you'll get every opinion under the sun. You ask someone different, everyone's going to feel something different, but either one will work. And, there's benefits to both, in my opinion, actually. And I think there can be a legitimate case made for both. But when you watch TV and see the shows and stuff, chances are they're going to be shooting, high dollar Berettas, Brownings, Benellis, that kind of stuff, top of the line guns. I assure you that you do not need to spend $1,500 on a shotgun to be able to go out there and take waterfowl effectively. A cheap 870 pump, Remington right off the shelf from, at Dick's or something like that, $300 or less. I can assure you will do the job for you. There's no question.
Yeah, and I think, we're not trying to debate whether a pump or a semi-auto is better, but, for the beginner, an 870 pump, you can get somewhere around $300 or less. So if that's something that, you're getting into it, you need still to buy decoys and you're looking at everything and it's just adding up, that might be the way to go. In that same case, I just talked to a guy I worked with that, he has a gun that his dad bought for him in 1969, and he goes on guided hunts all the time. And these guys, they show up with a $1,800 new Benelli, and he just tells them, boys, it's not the gun, it's the guy behind it, and he absolutely lights the birds up with that gun. He was telling me stories that just made me laugh because these guys couldn't hit anything, and he's sitting there dropping all these bluebills coming in. So, the speed of bluebills, and these guys, they have a, $1,800 gun, and his might have been 125, probably less than that, but back in 1969. So like he said, it's not always the gun, it's the guy behind it. So if you have confidence shooting, and I've seen guys with a pump unload faster than guys with a semi-auto. So, there's more than one way to drop birds.
Well, there's days where I wonder if I'm more accurate with my 870 than I am with my Beretta, because I find that when I'm shooting my semi-auto gun, I can pull the trigger pretty quick, and when I'm using my pump gun and I'm physically pumping another shell into the chamber, I'm refocusing and getting a better sight picture on the bird that I'm trying to shoot at, because it's giving me that momentary pause to just pick out the next one of the flock that I'm going after. Obviously, the advantages of the auto loader are the lessened recoil and things like that. But regardless of your taste there, a pump will get it done for sure. Don't be afraid to go used either. You can just find really great deals on used pump guns, and they're going to shoot. That you buy a solid 870. You're going to pass that on to your kids because it's gonna outlive you for sure. I've got an 870 that my dad bought for me when I was 12. I still hunt with it, and it still shoots just as good as the day that I got it. Matter of fact, the guy that we hunt with down on the Eastern Shore has the exact same gun, and this thing's like a legend because it never gets cleaned. It's completely rusted out. It's like a bronze-looking 870, but it goes bang every single time that he pulls the trigger, and he is absolutely lethal with it. So I've got no reason to believe that a quality pump shotgun can't get it done for a really long time.
Yeah, I always ask him where he gets his copper guns at, but that thing is rusty. But I tell you what, he says, when I put it away for the season, it's usually just sitting in a boat outside. And if you take a look at it, he isn't kidding. And he'll go out and man, he drops them for sure.
Yeah, and he hunts down in Maryland, with a lot of brackish water, the Chesapeake, salt water, that kind of stuff, and that can just be brutal on a firearm. But like I said, the gun will stand up. So chances are you probably have a gun in your closet, in your gun case that'll work right now. If you don't, you don't have to break the bank on that. But I want to circle back to the chokes again because, we both talked about using full chokes. I don't know if I would necessarily recommend that for somebody just getting started. Obviously, the most common chokes you're going to be used out there is modified and improved cylinder. Again, that's going to depend on how your gun patterns, with the loads that you're using, and all that kind of stuff. The important thing, though, is if you're using chokes like that, just make sure that you're using chokes that are designed for steel and not just lead. There are some that are just exclusive to one or the other. So just make sure that you're using one that's designed to handle the steel type material, vice the lead. That's something that's important. But chances are the chokes that come with your gun are likely going to be for both, and that you can probably use for steel. But you just want to verify that.
Yeah, that's a great point. You don't want to be shooting steel through a lead choke. And the choke game now, there's so many companies and so many different styles that that's more confusing than looking at decoys most of the time.
Yeah, I mean, you start buying aftermarket chokes, you're talking, you got to find the ones that are for your specific type of gun manufacturer. I just recently purchased one of the the heavy chokes from Heavy Shot. It's an extreme range. I love the choke, but it says that I can't use loads faster than 1,500 feet per second, and nothing larger than double B. So if I did want to, if I was into different loads and that kind of stuff, that would limit what I could use with that particular choke. So, it's one of those things where you kind of have to just figure out where you're at with that. But for me, unless you pattern your gun and you're really, really unhappy with the way that the stock chokes, are with the loads that you're using, I would not be looking to upgrade the chokes of my gun initially. I would go with what I have, and I shot stock stuff for a really long time and had great success. So that's one thing that I think can kind of come down the road. But good place to start is with your modified or your improved cylinder until you get some confidence and get a little better. And if you want to go up to the full choke, that's obviously up to you.
Yep, I agree with that totally.
Okay. Anything else on the guns and ammo aspect there that you want to throw in here before we move on?
No, and I'm just going to say it again, we're not, this is just what works for us. And to get someone started, there's so many options, but just make sure you do your research on it and what your gun can handle, what you can handle, and go from there. So there's a tons of options, tons of cheap options that will get the job done.
No question about that. Now let's move on to something that is a little more difficult in the financial aspect of this, and that's decoys. Make no mistake about it, decoys can be a very expensive venture. There's a lot of different manufacturers and companies out there to choose from, and there's a lot of different styles and price points. But initially, my recommendation is go small and focus on your scouting. Try to be where birds want to be. That way, there's less decoys required to have success. If you're going to be hunting primarily traffic areas and that sort of thing, where you're trying to pull birds from where they actually want to be going, you're going to struggle at times with small decoy spreads. So if you can get where they want to be and, have a small spread, 2 dozen decoys, something like that, you're going to be a lot further off as far as, having money left over to get the other things you want to do to get started. What do you think, Dan?
I think that's a great point. I think one of my first tips would be do research and find decoys that don't shine when they get wet. And we've talked about it before, waterfowlers go through, rain, snow, whatever the weather is. And there's some decoys that they just shine, and you don't want that. So, you have the flock decoys and everything now that, reduces shine. Just do a little bit of research, and guys will tell you, I don't use those because when they get wet, they just look like a light beacon and they stand out and just flare birds, all day long. And that's something that you definitely don't want.
And I think to clarify, you're talking more about field hunting, setting up, honkers in a field, that kind of thing. If you're hunting, if you're just hiking into a swamp or something like that, duck decoys, and when you're hunting water, that's not as big of an issue, and it's a little more in depth and that kind of thing. But what Dan's getting at is, it doesn't matter if you have $1,000 worth of decoys in the field if they're shining or, there's something not right about them, they're going to flare birds and you're not going to be successful. So, most decoys will come with at least a flocked head for honker decoys and that kind of thing when you're in the field. You can spend the money to do a fully flocked duck decoy that you're going to hunt with on the water. I don't do that. I hunt over foam-filled Higdon, decoys when I'm hunting on the water. And, I've been really happy with the way that those work. So, flocking is definitely something that the more you can have of it, the better at times. But also that's going to be more expensive. So, the first ever decoys I ever bought was, a dozen Avery or greenhead gear, mallard hot buys at Dick's for like $25 for a dozen. And that's what I used to get started on. And I still have those decoys. They've held up okay. They're not the world's best decoys, but that wasn't what I needed them for. I just needed something to help get me started and kind of get going. And, they accomplished that. So don't feel like you have to go rip through the Cabela's catalog and order, 6 dozen honker decoys or 6 dozen duck decoys to be successful. You don't. You just have to know where the birds want to be, and you got to set up as natural as you can. So if you're seeing flocks of 5 to 7, 8, mallards, that's what you should have in your spread or try to be. If you're hunting bigger flocks, obviously you're going to have more potentially needed. And, at that point you probably ought to look and try to get with some friends or, maybe someone through the DU chapters and that kind of thing where you can pool your resources a little bit because, it takes years sometimes to, to build up a good quality, large decoy spread.
Yeah. And talking about that, one thing that I still do all the time is I'll go on to Craigslist and search all the big cities around me because there's so many times that, a guy will have a couple kids and he just can't make it out anymore. And he went out and spent a ton of money on decoys or, blinds and he has to get rid of them. He just has to sell them. He doesn't use them and, they're taking up space in his garage. So that's a great way to, to acquire some product. On the other hand, when you were saying, pool resources, I don't think, in the last, I don't know, probably since I started, we always combine decoys going out. Unless it's, if we're duck hunting and we're just throwing a small spread out, maybe just one guy will bring decoys. But if we're field hunting, if we're goose hunting, we all take our decoys out. So, don't feel like you need to bring, 12 dozen Bigfoots out to a field just by yourself. Talk to your friends that are going out with you and pull them up.
Yeah, we're the same way like you are. We always pull our resources together and everyone brings all their decoys out and, we just put our names on them and throw them all together and it works out really well. But another thing I want to point out is, you always got to remind yourself where you're going to be hunting, how you're going to weight these decoys, with the decoy weights that are available. There's a lot of different options there. Are these going to be decoys that you're going to throw over your shoulder on a Texas rig and hike in with them? Or are you going to have them in slotted bags or a mesh bag? They're all kind of in there together. Keep in mind the water depth that you're going to be hunting, the current, all of that kind of stuff, the size of the decoy. There's a lot of different choices out there on the decoy weight market. It always just pays a little bit of time to think about what's going to work best for your situation. What kind of weights do you guys tend to use up there, Dan?
We go with the backwood decoy system. So, those guys put together a great product and, most of the water that we hunt, I know you get on the rivers quite a bit, but mostly, we're lakes and ponds, some swampy areas. So we don't need, 8 foot or anything that long. We're usually in the 2 to 5 foot range. So, they put a product together that is plenty good enough for what we do.
Yeah, I hunt a little bit of areas where, my backwoods decoy systems, my BDS rigs work really well. We hunt some Potomac River where the water's a little bit deeper. So that's when the long lines come into effect, on some of the diver decoys that we use. But I really like, if I'm going to bag them up and I'm going to carry them in, I really like the keel grabber style J hooks as well. When I'm hunting water where I need 10, 15 foot of decoy cord just because of the, the water depths and that kind of thing. So a lot of different choices out there to choose from. My only point is here, give it a little bit of thought before you just go out and start buying a bunch of stuff and realize that you needed longer weight or longer line, or less weight or more weight, that kind of thing. So kind of think that through a little bit. But what else on the decoy front, Dan? What else do you think is important for the beginner to consider?
I think if you're going out by yourself, speaking about goose hunting, don't be afraid to get a nice silhouette decoy. And by a silhouette, I mean a dozen or 2 dozen. And, they do really well as far as filling around blinds. And, there's just some really good companies that have a quality product out with that right now. So don't be afraid to go that route. And some, like I said before, they'll shine all day if it's a sunny day. And, do your research and make sure that you're not getting a shiny silhouette. And by a silhouette for the beginner that doesn't know what a silhouette is, it's pretty much just, it's not a full body. It's just, a cutout, and either a wooden cutout or a hard plastic or whatever it may be. Some are fully flocked, that's the top of the line there. But, like I said, it's great fill around the blinds and definitely expands your spread, and it's very easy to carry if only 1 or 2 guys are going out.
Yeah, and if you're trying to get in on a budget, silhouette decoys are going to be a really good option to have. The problem with silhouettes is, to be really effective, if you're going to go just silhouettes, you have to have a lot more of them. And that's probably a discussion for another day, as far as how silhouettes work, as far as creating the illusion of movement and all of those sort of things. But, it's a 2D model of a goose. So there's only 2 sides that you're going to see of it. So when the birds are straight on with the thin part, obviously the bird disappears and they can't see it. So there you need more. What I got started with was I would just buy shells. They're cheaper than full bodies. They're still 3D, and they fit my budget a lot better. And you can buy motion stakes for them and that kind of thing. So, the good thing about if you're buying decoys, regardless of what you buy now, you'll still be able to use that same thing down the road. So don't be afraid to buy the less expensive stuff first. And as you build and you get more confidence, you build, you buy a little bit nicer stuff and you add to the spread. But what else, Dan? Anything?
I think that about covers it. Like you said, the shells, there's the motion sticks for the shells. Sometimes I like using those better than full bodies, just because they'll spin around and, your spread really comes to life. So, don't be afraid to get a couple dozen of those, and those are easy to carry too. They're stackable and just they're easier on you.
2 quick things I wanted to add as I just dawned on me. One, not only we talked about how you're going to carry them into the field and that kind of stuff, make sure you have enough room and know what you're getting into when you buy a dozen full body honker decoys, for example, just how much space that takes up. Not only do you have room to keep them at your home, do you have room to get them in your truck, or if you're driving an SUV or something, get them out to the field. All of that stuff has to come into play. And then one more thing with the silhouette decoys, I wanted to circle back around. One of the things that I think is really important about these decoys that they offer that not other ones do, if you're hunting in a field in a layout blind, for example, that's got not a lot of cover and it's just real tight, cut down, that kind of thing, and you can't dig in your blind, I've seen people actually stick silhouette decoys in the stubble straps of their blind. So, it stands actually on the blind and helps break up the silhouette of the blind itself. There's not really many other decoys out there that offer that opportunity to get right on the blind and look natural. So, that alone is probably good enough reason to have at least a few laying around if you're going to be hunting in those kind of situations. So just a couple of the things that I thought about there as far as the versatility of the different kinds of decoys and everything. So let's spend a little bit of time on this. I don't want to spend a bunch of time on this because I think this is maybe the least important part of this whole thing here is, gear, camo, sort of waterfowl hunting specifically. Outside of waders and all that goes along with that, I'm not sure there's a whole lot else that you need as far as clothing wise specific for waterfowl hunting. But what do you think, Dan?
Yeah, just realize the temperatures that you're hunting in. If you are going to purchase waders, the thinsulate that you want. If you do a lot of late season, you want to stay warm, and I think that's a big deal. So if you hunt, you're going to have a lot of the base layers, I feel like. So just make sure your outerwear, if you do purchase new, is what you need.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to be field hunting for geese, you can throw on your scent lock or your scent blocker or whatever. You can wear that out there. You're going to be fine. If you're going to be hunting in water, obviously you need hip boots or waders and that kind of thing. And this brings up a unique feature or a unique issue for waterfowl hunters, in that if you take a fall when you're wearing waders and you get water in those waders and they fill up, it's not going to drain out. So obviously there's an inherent danger there when you're talking about hunting in deeper water and holes that you could step into, that kind of thing. So it's definitely recommended that if you're going to be getting on waders, to use a wader belt, a safety belt that goes around your waist, that should you step in water that would go up over your waders, it would prevent your entire, full waders of filling with water and dragging you underneath. Obviously, it could save your life in a situation like that. Not to mention, if you are fortunate enough to get out of the water, you're in some of the coldest temperatures that you can imagine. You're almost immediately going to be fighting hypothermia and things of that nature. So it's a serious situation that, you definitely want to pay attention to if you're going to be out wading in water that, where it's a little bit, you're not just in knee deep water, you're talking waters that's up to the, your chest and your stomach and that kind of stuff. So definitely a unique situation that, someone who's just getting started needs to be really, really careful.
Yeah. And checking the weather, a buddy of mine and myself, we went out a couple years ago and a 12-foot duck boat, and we went out on Pima tuning, and we knew that a storm would be rolling in, but we didn't expect 35-mile-an-hour winds, and we got between a couple islands, and man, I tell you what, we rode that boat all the way to shore because there was nothing else we could do, and it was a really scary situation when you start tipping over some of those waves, and you're kind of holding on and just making sure that you stay above the water. So it can get scary real quick, and check the weather, and like you said, it's cold, and unfortunately you always hear about a couple duck hunters that are out and don't make it back. So make sure you know what you're getting into, and safety first.
It seems like we hear stories about that every single year, unfortunate tragedies like that. So there's not a duck out there that's worth any of that. So keep that in mind when you guys are heading out. But as far as camo and the rest of the stuff goes, it's kind of just the same as a lot of the other situations. Cover your face, layer for warmth, try to use your whatever camo that you have that will brush you in to the best of your hunting area. All of that stuff is going to be kind of applied to the way it is when you're deer hunting and that sort of thing. So other than waders, not a lot of completely different gear that you might need. And if you're going to be hunting fields, you may not need any gear. If you have a Carhartt bibs and a jacket, or if you're going to be down in a blind, camo's not as important. So.
And just going back to the camo, I was going to say the decoy gloves, they probably don't have to be camo, because you're out in the decoys, and I know the guides down on the Eastern Shore, theirs aren't camo. They have the gloves all the way up to their shoulders, and pulling everything out, and just use that to stay dry. So when it's really cold, you don't want wet hands, you don't want wet shirt. So that's just a tip. If you're getting started, you don't have to buy the expensive decoy gloves that are camoed out, because it's just for setting the decoys, and then you're most likely going to take those off. So,
yeah, I think that's important, because it's easy to say that, to think, well, I don't need decoy gloves because, I've got gloves or whatever. When you're digging around in the water and it's cold, you definitely want some gloves that are designed to do that. The ones that, I've seen them at Harbor Freight for sure. They got rubber in their line, so they're nice and warm, and they work just as fine as a $40 banded neoprene glove would do. So definitely a good point there. But that is a piece of gear that probably shouldn't go overlooked if you're going to be hunting in water in the late season, without question. Anything else, Dan, in that regard?
I don't know. I think we covered it pretty well.
Okay. So the other thing that I think is important to discuss here when we're talking gear is, calls, duck calls, goose calls, all that kind of stuff. Where do you stand on how a beginner should approach that, Dan?
On a beginner, I didn't want to get straight into acrylic calls just because of the price point. So there's tons of polycarbonate calls that, there's some guys out there that sound better on polycarb or a wooden call than they do acrylic. And sometimes you want a wooden call or a polycarb over acrylic. You don't want to be loud in certain situations. So, you can go out to a Gander Mountain and buy a $30 polycarbonate call to get started, at least learn the calling. There's tons of DVDs and, follow along. So look for a pack that has a DVD and a call, and, those guys will teach you how to do it. So I think that's a good way to go.
Yeah. And you're talking specifically to short reed goose calls primarily.
Yeah. Well, with the acrylic, I mean, starting out, you don't need an acrylic duck call either. So you can get a polycarb duck call and do good work on that.
See, I'm in the camp of if you're just a basic, beginning hunter, goose hunter, I would recommend going the flute style call to start. It's a lot easier to operate. It's gonna, when you're out there hunting, the last thing you want to be focused on is, can I make the right sounds with the call? You're going to be better off focusing on, calling the shots properly and all that kind of stuff. The flute is going to give you the most flexibility and ease of use to make a sound without worrying about back pressure and too much and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's a great way to start, but I would encourage everybody to try to get into the short reed goose calling. Polycarbonates are fine. Wood calls are fine. Acrylic calls are obviously great as well, but, it's not like you're going to be on a competition stage where you need the crack and the volume all the time of an acrylic call. So you can get away with, the lower end of those. And, you can search online. It's pretty easy to find guys on a polycarbonate call, sounding incredible. So, that's definitely the way to go. And on duck calls, same thing, polycarbonate, duck calls, wood duck calls are all very good that you can really make good sounds out of, pretty quickly without much experience. And if you get, just torn up with it and you're getting into calling and that kind of stuff, definitely take a look at the acrylic calls, but it's not mandatory. But so having said all that, Dan, what do you think as far as your philosophy on actually calling at birds in the field, when you're getting started?
Well, like you said before, if you're on the X, you don't have to call that much. So if you're a beginner, and you're on the X, try and if it's goose season, just kind of call back to them, kind of mimic them. You don't have to get hot and heavy, but there's always a learning curve, and there's always, you always want to call, and you want to mess around, and that's a great way to learn. So, go out, and if it's something that you want to really get into, see what you can get away with. Go out and blow the calls. I wouldn't be super shy on it, but at the same time, know your limitations and see what works. See what works for you.
I would honestly compare it a lot to, to anyone out there that's been turkey hunting. When you're hunting turkeys, you don't call any more than you have to get the bird to respond to you the way you would like. If you, cluck a couple times and the bird gobbles, and you wait 10 minutes and you cluck again and he gobbles and he's cut the distance in half, you're doing it right. So you're not going to just pick up and start calling for no good reason. Duck hunting is the same way, same with geese. When you can see birds and they're reacting positively to the sounds that you're making, you're doing something right. If you're making sounds and you see them reacting in an adverse fashion, birds peeling off or trying to turn, that kind of thing, you're not doing something right and you want to steer away from that. That could be a combination of you're making a bad sound or you're just making too much sound. So I would err on the side of caution and try not to overcall as you're getting started, simply because you may not have the confidence to know, are they flaring because of the noise I just made or the pace of my calling and that sort of thing. Most people tend to overcall as a generalization. Like we've said 100 times on the show, if you are on the X, you can keep the call in your pocket and they're probably going to come right to where you're at. Other times it's not that simple. So I would be conservative until you absolutely are confident in your abilities on whatever call you're using. and your ability to read the birds and how they're responding to the calls that you're using. I can promise you, it doesn't matter if you're using a $150 rich and tone mallard call, or one that you picked up off the shelf for $15 at Walmart. If you're just out there blowing it with no idea what you're doing or what you're trying to get the birds to do, you're no further ahead either way. So if that's your mentality, you're probably better off leaving the call in your pocket, to be honest with you.
Yep. And I'm gonna transition into our next segment about hunting and set up a little bit. And I was reading a couple articles the other day about some of the best duck callers in the world that they won world championships, and they said in an interview if they could have their calling or motion over duck decoys, what would they take? And they said 100% of the time they would take motion in their decoys. So speaking of that, setting up a jerk rig on a couple decoys for ducks could be, or even geese if it's on water, could be much more valuable than any call in your pocket. And that's coming from world champion callers.
And why that's so important is it looks really unnatural for birds to be sitting on the water with absolutely no movement. So on days when there's no wind, having that jerk string allows you to not only, yank the birds and get a little movement in them, but it allows you to put ripple in the water and those sort of things. Those are just natural, things that ducks would anticipate seeing in a natural setting. So, these are the types of things that the more you can replicate and the more that you can look natural, the more success you're going to have. So, jerk rigs are important. For goose hunting, a flag is incredibly important. You're simulating birds landing in the spread. We'll talk more in depth about, goose flagging in later episodes, but, definitely motion, as a general rule is super important, when you're hunting waterfowl, no doubt. Okay, so let's just, we're not going to talk a ton about specific hunting setups because there's just so many different things that you can get into with that. So we're going to kind of stay high level here and sort of speak in generalities. But in general, when you're setting up, number one thing is you're going to want to do is you're going to want to try to get the wind at your back, or if you can't do that, at minimum a crosswind. Obviously, birds are going to circle around and they're going to want to land just like an airplane with their wings into the wind so that they can have better control when they're coming in. So if at all possible, you want to use that to your advantage and position yourself to make the best shot on birds when they're going to be working into your spread and landing into the wind.
Yeah, we could talk all day about wind and setting up and not being afraid to change your decoys around if the wind changes. And that's just, it can be frustrating at times, especially if, different storm fronts are coming through and you're sitting there and all of a sudden you notice that, you don't want the birds to be landing behind you, coming in that way. So, we could talk a long time about that. But another thing, try and have the sun at your back. And it's just, one, it kind of, it'll blind the birds a little bit, so to speak, and then it'll hide you better in your setup.
Yeah, and mine, obviously, if the sun's at your back, it creates better shadows, for you to hide and conceal. And so that's one's challenging to always make work. But I can promise you, if you've ever hunted in the morning and the sun's in your face when you're hunting, you can realize why it's so important to try to get it at your back, because you can't see anything when those birds are working because the sun just glaring in your face. And that's what you want them to have when they're working your spread, not vice versa.
And then that'll just show any, inconsistencies in your blinds and, trying to brush in. So, and especially if you don't have anything on your face is going to be shining real bright, and that's going to guarantee to flare birds.
Yeah, without question. We've talked about that on here, in the past for sure. But, another thing that I think is important when you're setting up your decoy spread, there's no right or wrong way to set up your spread. The overlying caution that I would leave everyone is just make sure you leave room for birds to land. It's easy to just kind of throw everything out there and, you want it to look big and you knot it up like it's a big dark blob in the distance, that kind of thing. But when birds come in, if you make it hard for them to come in at speed and land in your spread, you're going to have more birds flaring and not working the way you want it. So don't be afraid to just not leave nice big pockets of where you want the birds to finish, and then you can use the wind and the sun and your hide around those spots to put yourself in the best position to be successful. So I know I've done it a ton of times where I've had to go out and push decoys out because you can just tell by the way the bird's working, there's just not quite enough room there for what they're looking to land into.
Yeah, and I think this goes back to what we talk about all the time is scouting. If you have birds coming into a field at 2 to 3 to 4 at a time, you don't need to be super wide. But if you have flocks of 30 or 40, if they can't fit in there, they're going to end up outside your decoys. If that's a field they want to be in, they're still going to land in it, but they're going to land somewhere where you can't shoot them. And that is more frustrating than anything. And on to that, when you're scouting and see the birds, see how they're setting up, see how they're walking around, see if they're paired up, see if they're grouped up in family groups, or, when it gets colder, they're tighter. So, do your scouting and see how they are in their natural habitat, how they're acting on a daily basis.
So those are sort of the general rule of thumb things that you want to think about when you're setting up. I want to address one sort of specific thing that I've seen a lot and have got asked about a lot, and it's more particular to hunting geese and the whole ratio to how many feeders you should have to how many sentry decoys or lookers, and where do you place them and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to give my opinion on that, and I'll ask you, Dan, what you think and how you kind of size up with that. But I don't pay attention too much to the ratio. And I say that because, if you look at birds naturally in the field at any given time, you got a bunch of different ones with their heads up and heads down, all that kind of stuff. I try to get a decent mix. And instead of looking at the ratio, I try to look at, do I have enough looker or sentry decoys to place them in my spread where I want them to be placed? So, for example, I always put them out on the ends of the line. So whichever ones are going to be towards the outsides of the spread, they're going to be the ones that are out looking for danger. If you're setting them up in family groups, if you've ever looked at geese in family situations, there's a handful of them that are feeding, and there's usually at least one with its head up looking on behalf of the group, for any kind of danger or anything like that. I also like to put a few right in the hole with their head up and, looking to stimulate birds that had just landed in the pocket and they're kind of walking up into the feeding area with the rest of the birds. Other than that, I may sprinkle an occasional one, throughout just to mix it up and give variety. Usually they're pretty good to have around the blinds too, because they're taller and they help break up the profile a little bit. But so I don't get hung up on a specific number of lookers or sentry decoys that I want, but I just make sure that when I set my spread up, I have enough of them to place in the key areas that I think are important. What do you think about that, Dan?
I agree with you 100%. One thing you probably don't want to do, and something I've seen happen before, if you put them all together, if they're out looking for danger. So if you have, a dozen just head up looking one way, and, that is simulating that something's wrong. And that, we flared a lot of birds on one hunt by doing that. So, I saw it and I was like, oh, I don't really agree with that, but, I let it happen because I was invited on the hunt. So, it happened and we flared birds. I wasn't real happy about it, but it was just, I thought, hey, maybe it worked for them, so we'll try it out. And it seemed to be not good for us.
Yeah. It's always tough when you get invited on a hunt and, you want to do it a different way and, you don't want to overstep. So that can be tough, but, in general, I think we've covered the basics of hunting. Of course, we could talk this for probably a full nother segment or show, just talking about different setups and different situations. Obviously, if you've got a question or a setup that you particularly hunt specifically that you're unsure of, you can obviously reach out to us and we'll do our best to get back to you or answer you through the show here and get any clarification to that situation. But Dan, is there anything else that you wanted to add to the hunting setup section in general, or just kind of give us a little parting nugget for us here?
One, I just want to say I appreciate the feedback. Most of it's been really good, and like we said, this was solely because of people calling in and asking, how do I get started? So I think we gave a pretty good foundation here. Nothing can beat experience. So either going with someone that hunts or, a group, try and meet up with some guys, go out and learn the sport, and go out by yourself if you have to, and learn about it. And there's nothing that beats experience. We talk about things that don't work, and it's because we've been out and found out the hard way. So if there's any way that we can help, keep calling, keep emailing, and we'll try and help you out.
Yeah, I'm going to echo a little bit of what you just said. As a waterfowl hunter that didn't have a mentor, so to speak, to kind of walk me through how it's done, I think it's important to embrace the challenges and the setbacks that you have if you're going that route. You're going to have days where you don't see any ducks, or you don't do any good. You don't even shoot your gun. But every time out, you're going to learn something different about what you did or what you didn't do that can help you be more successful. It really feels good when you go through those trials and tribulations and you harvest a few birds, and you know that the adjustments that you made had a positive impact on your ability to have success this time out. So keep that in mind when you're out there hunting, and don't give up if you have a couple tough hunts. We've all been through that, and there will be better days ahead. That is for sure. If you have additional questions or concerns about your situation or things that you want to chat with us about, again, reach out to us, info@hpoutdoors.com. Call us on our HP Outdoors hotline, 724-609-FOWL, 724-609-3695. And you can leave us a message, and we will absolutely do our best to answer all of your questions and continue the conversation through that route. So,
I wanted to go back. Sorry to cut you off. I wanted to go back to one of your previous parting shots. I guess I'm still a little bitter about Pennsylvania passing up on our early season for teal. Make sure if you're going out, and I know DU Ducks Unlimited has a quiz for identification. Make sure that you know what you're hunting, and make sure you know the birds that you're shooting at. And we can't say it enough. Just do your research, and you wouldn't go out on a whitetail hunt and not know what you were shooting at. So same thing with birds. And when you were talking about the mallard limits and only 2 hens or 3 woodies, you make sure you know what you're doing. And that's, going for a beginner, it's going to be tough. Like you said before, a lot of the birds look alike. But go out and do your research. Even in the off season, go out and watch the birds and learn the game.
Yeah, I would compare duck identification to antler restriction, for example, as a deer hunter. You're not going to shoot a deer unless you know it's got the appropriate number of points to be legal. It should be the same for duck hunting, especially in some of these birds. Black ducks, for example, in our neck of the woods, you can shoot one in the later season. You can't shoot them in the early season. For someone that's not real used to looking at black ducks, they can look a lot like a mallard, in low light, and as far as the size and that kind of thing. At least they did to me when I first got going. So, those can be a challenge, and it's definitely something you have to pay attention to, because there's no quicker way to have a bad hunter to ruin your day than to have a chat with a conservation officer because you illegally shot a duck that you thought was a different species. So I think that's a great point. And trust me, that is not an easy thing to do. It's very difficult, I think, to get good at identifying ducks. But it's definitely worth the effort to do your best and try. So I agree with you there, Dan. All right, we're going to go ahead and transition here, and we're going to wrap it up into our parting shot. All right, for this week's parting shot, we're going to talk a little bit about social media and just the way that you can interact with us and how much we enjoy seeing everyone's pictures and videos that you guys take out in the field and sharing them with us. HP Outdoors, you can find us on Facebook and Twitter, and we encourage everyone to post pictures to our page, share your successes with us. If somehow you've picked up a tip from this show that you think has been beneficial and helped you be more successful in the field, by all means, post pictures. And you go on there, we'll be posting our stuff. Dan was recently out there shooting crows and thinning the crow population out a good bit, so got some good pictures on that. So it doesn't just have to be ducks. We're outdoorsmen. We enjoy spending time in the outdoors with friends and family, and we encourage all of you guys to share your successes with us on the Facebook page and through calling into the show. And we'd like to have you guys engaged as much as possible. So check us out on Facebook and Twitter, and share some of your successes with us. And we're going to definitely be doing the same. And we look forward to getting going even more as the season really kind of picks up and the cold weather moves in and the migration really takes off. That's going to do it for episode 6 of the HP Outdoors Waterfowl podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed our discussion on waterfowl hunting basics and the tips and techniques that you need to know to get started in the waterfowl hunting sport. If you have any other questions or concerns, you can email us at info@hpoutdoors.com. Check us out on Facebook and Twitter. You can download the show on iTunes. You can have it directly downloaded to your phone, tablet, or computer by subscribing to the podcast. And we'd obviously appreciate a 5-star review and a rating if you have an opportunity. So for Dan, I'm Josh. Until next time, take care.